extend a welcome and good morning again to all that have chosen to be out here and worship with us this Sunday morning. Hopefully it's been a good day for you so far. It's been edifying so far to be here and worship and sing praises and commune around the table. We're grateful and thankful for those that have participated in the service so far this morning and have made it a joy and uplifting to be here. And we pray that the next few minutes will add to that, or at least give us something to take with us as we go throughout the week that can help our Christian walk, our attempt to follow the things that Christ and God have told us to follow and live according to his will a little bit better. You know, we started a couple years ago actually, looking through and talking about or thinking about the questions that Jesus asked. And we've done, I think Jonathan's done one or two. This will be the sixth question that we're going to look at this morning that Christ asked. And I think it's important for us as we look through those, we won't go through the stats this morning again, but you know, Christ didn't ask a lot of questions. He asked very few. And he asked very pointed questions to us. And those questions do things for us and do things for our Christian walk and cause us to have a lot of introspect and evaluation of our lives. And we've looked at 5 of those so far. We'll go through those real quick. If you remember when Christ was in the boat and he was asleep and the storm came and the disciples there were scared. And they went and woke him up and he asked them, why are you afraid? And as we looked at that, we dove into the storms of life and how they come, and Christ gave us some good teaching on how to handle those storms, because we all know the storms of life come our way. If you remember back probably a year and a half ago or so, we talked about 2 blind men from Capernaum. If you were here with us that morning, we closed our eyes and we allowed ourselves to go back to those days in Capernaum, and we followed those 2 gentlemen, those 2 blind guys, and we watched them in their encounter with Christ. And we talked about the faith that they had and what that faith led them to do, and the faith that led them to do the things that they needed to do to be healed. We talked about Jesus and his encounter with this infirm man there at the pool. A man that had been challenged with physical ailments for 38 years of his life. And the question that Jesus asked him was, do you want to be healed? Which seems a little silly, if you will, for Jesus to ask a man that's been infirm or lame for that long if he wanted to be healed. But when we dive into that and we peel that back a little bit and unpack it just a little bit, we look at what Christ is asking us in that situation. Are we ready? He was asking that man, are you ready to be healed? Are you ready for the things that come with it? And as we talked to that, we talked about, are we ready when we ask Christ for forgiveness, when we're asking for him to heal us from our challenges? Are we ready for what that comes and what that brings with it? We talked about Andrew and John as they were there following John the Baptist. And they saw Jesus walk by, and he said, that's the one we've been talking about. And remember, they turned and they followed him, and Jesus asked him, what are you seeking? And if you remember back, we talked about some of the things that we should be seeking with spiritual maturity and things like that, and the things that really should guide our everyday life, and truly look into what are we truly seeking in our lives. And then lastly, a few months ago, we talked about the story of Peter and him walking on the water. And Jesus asking him, why did he doubt? And we talked a little bit about what we should believe and what we shouldn't have any doubt in. The fact that God exists. That we need to be a believer of his word, and that he is a rewarder of those that seek him diligently. We talked a little bit about this. You know, these questions that Jesus asked, if we look at them and do them the justice that they deserve, we'll be challenged. It'll inspire us. It'll inspire us to do better. It'll challenge us and challenge the way that we live and the way we think. Christ's questions should persuade us to be better. We've talked about the connection. When we connect with people, the connection that we have, when we ask questions and we engage, these questions bring that connection to people that you don't have if you don't engage and you don't ask those questions. And we've talked about how questions can disarm people. If you're in a situation where it's confrontational, the worst thing to do is tell people what to do. The best thing to do is ask questions to understand their situation and where they're at. Questions are very valuable, and if we can use them in our lives, they can be very beneficial to us. And especially as we talk about the questions that Jesus asks us, if we can truly unpack those and use these things to think about Jesus asking us a question and let that do these things in our heart. This morning, we're going to talk about another question. You've probably already guessed what it is as we had our reading from Luke chapter 6. Jesus asked a question there. Before we do that, I want to think about this for just a minute. Just imagine yourself walking down a street, down a path, and you see someone coming towards you, and it's someone you think you know. And as you get closer to them, they run up to you, they hug you, they say, "Where have you been? I'm so glad to see you." You might see a vision like this. These two kids running together that's a great scene. And as you come together and the kids, the person's talking to you and they're like, "Yeah, it's been great. Haven't seen you. We need to connect. We need to get back together. We need to have that connection." You'd probably leave that interaction thinking, "Yeah, I'm going to get to know that person better. I'm going to acquaint with that person. I'm going to get closer to him." And that's how you would leave that. That's the actions. That's the word, excuse me, not the actions. That's the words they've said. We're going to get back together. We're going to be friends again. This is my long-lost friend. Now imagine if you meet that person in a few days, 3 or 4 days later. You see that person walking towards you again. You would probably start thinking, we're going to have another event like we just had. We're going to run to each other. We're going to hug each other. We're going to get acquainted. We're going to bring that back up. But this may happen. And this is a little short video. You can see there the grandpa in the back. Grandma doesn't like me to use this anymore, but the grandpa in the back, and you see these kids running to each other, and all of a sudden the kid dodges and goes the other way. If you had that encounter with a person on day 1 that ran and hugged you, and then on day 2 acted like they didn't know you, you would have some questions about their intent. You would have some questions about their true feelings about you. It's easy to use words. It's easy to use words to say stuff. It's a little bit harder to put actions into words, or put words into action, I guess is the right way to put it. And as we look at this chapter here in Luke chapter 6, this is really what Jesus is talking about. He's dealing with this issue that we as humans have about saying things and not doing things, about using lip service. In verse 46 there, Jesus says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you to do?" Very profound question. A question that we could all ask each other today about many different things in our lives. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? Before we dive into this question a little bit, let's get the context of what's going on here. Many of our questions that we've looked at that Jesus asked have been questions to a couple people, maybe a few people. Most of these questions were driven at smaller groups, if you will. This morning, this question really revolves around him talking to a large group. In the book of Luke, a few verses earlier, Luke describes this crowd as his apostles. He had just called his 12 apostles to him, so they were there. Luke uses these words, a great crowd of his disciples. So we had the 12 apostles, we had a great crowd of disciples, those who believed and followed. And then he also uses this term, a great multitude of people from a great distance, from all Judea and from all around areas. So there was a bunch of people following in Jesus. So at this time, Jesus is talking to a bunch of people, a great multitude and a great crowd is the way Luke termed it. So we can suppose from that these are pretty big crowds that Jesus is talking to and is telling and teaching. He had told them earlier, he gave them a lesson, a sermon about how to live as a kingdom or a citizen of the kingdom. He taught them things like how to love your enemies. He taught them things about judging others, things that are very, very important in becoming a member of the kingdom and keeping harmony within the kingdom. He talked to them about the type of fruit we bear. As a member of this kingdom, we should be bearing fruit, and he talked about what type of fruit that should be. And here Jesus asks a pretty poignant question. He speaks to those who acknowledge him as Lord, but don't do his teachings, don't act his teachings. He challenges us all to consider the depth and the commitment and whether our actions are consistent with our words. Put another way, he says, Jesus, why do you proclaim that Jesus or God has an important place in your life, but yet you don't live like it? That's really the question Jesus is getting at here. Why do you call me Lord? Lord has a place of authority, a place of importance, a place of influence in your life. Why do you call me that and not do the things I say? We as humans are plagued with this problem of saying one thing and our actions don't follow that. And I've got a couple quotes this morning, and you'll have to forgive me. The last couple weeks, I've probably ingested more Thunder interviews and Thunder media than I have in the last 2 years. But since we've won the championship, there's a lot of that out there, and I've listened to these guys quote things. And it's amazing how well their quotes fit into our life, should fit into our life. So my first one of the day is Chet Holmgren. He quoted this. He said, "Everybody's a winner until it's inconvenient for them." And I thought that's exactly what we're talking about here. What Chet's saying is it's easy to profess you're a winner and talk about it, but when the rubber hits the road, do your actions follow that up? In his world, it's when you don't get the playing time, or you don't get the notoriety, or you don't get the ball as much, all that kind of stuff. When that stuff doesn't happen to you, are you still a winner? Are you still able to produce the actions that follow the words? And that's what Jesus is really talking to us here about. We can profess that he's Lord. We can scream to the mountaintops, if you will. Put on social media how much we love Christ and love God and follow his word, and we do all that stuff. But do our actions back that up? That's really the question that Jesus is talking about. True discipleship is not merely verbal. It's about doing what he says. In James chapter 2, verses 14, we won't read it, but that's the faith and works discussion. And if we've got the faith, the works will follow. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. If we've got true faith, the works, the things that we should be doing, not that those works save us, but if we're a true disciple, a true follower, those works will follow that faith. His words must be put into practice for them to have value in our lives. You know, I think it's interesting that he says, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord?" That repetition of the word Lord. In reading and doing some research on that, it may not mean anything more, but it seems to me that Christ is calling out to people that proclaim from the mountaintops, if you will, and say all the right stuff, but don't do what he says. Maybe in today's time, it's the people that post on social media. Maybe it's people that come to church every Sunday. Maybe it's people that talk a good life, but aren't actually able to put that into work, into action. I think there's some significance to the Lord, Lord, the repetition there. So as Jesus asks them this question, he goes on to say, he says, "And everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you what he is like." You know, we had some study about the hard sayings of Jesus. And we talked through that on Wednesday nights, and we talked, some of them were hard to understand, some were hard to do, some were easy to understand. You know, as we look at this, and Jesus taught in a lot of parables, and some of the parables were a little more complicated to understand, and those that would hear him would come to him afterwards and say, "Explain exactly what this means." This parable that Jesus puts here in front of these gentlemen, and in front of this group of people, I shouldn't say gentlemen, in front of this group of people, is not real hard to understand. It's pretty simple to understand. He says, I'm going to tell you by this parable what this is like. Everyone who hears my words and does them. He says, he is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when a flood arose, the stream broke against that house and could not shake it because it had been well built. So Jesus said, here's what a good guy does. Here's what the smart guy does. We call him the wise builder. He builds his foundation on the rock. That rock is the words that I tell you. That rock are the things that I tell you to do, the things that I tell you to stay away from, the type of person I need you to be. That's the rock. He said, when the storms of life come, they're not going to move that house. They're not going to shake it. But then he contrasts that. We often call this the foolish builder. He says, but the one who hears and does not do them is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the stream broke against it, immediately it fell, and the ruin of that house was great. You know, there's been many lessons on this parable and many outlines of it, but it is pretty simple. It's not hard to understand. It's hard, maybe it's hard for us to truly comprehend all of it, but it's not terribly hard to understand. If we want to have a foundation, if we want to have a house, a life that's built, we've got to have a foundation that's in His Word and in His teachings. Well, look at this picture. This is a picture from the coast in Florida, Mexico City Beach, I believe. In 2018, you may remember there was a Hurricane Michael that blew through that. And this picture was taken. This house is pretty famous. If you've studied this studied this parable very much, you may have looked into this and seen this. This is all over. They had CNN did stories about this house and the things about it. And all the research I did, I wanted to be able to tell you that this house, that guy had driven down to bedrock and his house was saved. But that's not exactly true. He built on a different foundation, but he built on a different rock, if you will. So you can imagine building in Florida, there's code that they have to meet. Certain standards that they have to meet for the homes, and that code is for the homes to be able to withstand about 125 to 150 mile per hour winds. And you can do that. And if you do that, you meet code, you can build your house. When you look at the ruin of those houses around there, those were the houses that built to that code. Hurricane Michael had winds in excess of 150 miles an hour. And it came and it took out those other houses. This particular house, the gentleman that built this house, they went way far above code, what they needed. Their house was built to withstand winds of up to 240 miles an hour is what they predicted. They took the rock, if you will, the code, if you will, and they dug deep into that, and they buried their house in that code, in that structure. They put cement through it. They did all kinds of things through it and built it in a way that it would withstand the storms that came. I liken that to our lives. If we dig deep into that foundation, we dig deep into that rock. If you allow me to use the similarity between codes. You know, they had a building code and they had to meet codes, and you could do that, and it was less expensive, less hard, easier to do to build to that code. But if we want a house, if we want a life with a foundation that's deep, we've got to dig deeper. We've got to go into the code, the law. Again, allow me to use that term, but diving into the words that Jesus told us, the things that he set out for us. If we dig into that and build our lives on that, we'll have a house that stands. We'll have a foundation that's firm and secure. The builders of those other houses, it was a little easier. It was a little quicker. It was a little less expensive. The builder of the house that stood invested more. It was more than just lip service. I can imagine those building the other homes that said, you got to get to 125 to 150 mile per hour winds. And they were like, whatever, just do whatever it takes. Do the minimum to get us to the code. Sometimes I feel like that's what our lip service is to Christ, to God, to one another. Just do the minimum. I don't really want to act on it, but I'll do the minimum. These gentlemen that built this house, they went further. They went deeper. They engaged. They put their words into action. It took more commitment, sacrifice to do this, but they built a house that would stand. You know, as I was putting this together, and when we think about things that we build and go away, that's what Christ likens a life to. That if we build it on lip service, when the storms come, it's going to go away. We've all seen pictures of sandcastles and things that were intricate, and they're beautiful. And if you've been on the beach and you see them, you walk by them, you go, that's great. But you know it's not going to last. We can understand that. We can understand building something like this, and every one of us can look at that, and we think about the painstaking detail that went into building that and the time and the effort. But every one of us in this room knows that's not going to last. That's what Jesus is trying to show to us about a life that's built on lip service, if you will. A life that's built on words. It's not going to last. It doesn't have the foundation that it needs. So a few thoughts on this parable. The first thing that comes to my mind in this parable this is something I thought of this morning as I was reading through this. I don't even have a slide for it, but as I read through that parable again this morning, I noticed something that Jesus talked about the wise builder that built his life, his house on that solid rock. In my mind, I've always read that parable. I'm like, well, the storms came and that thing stood the test of time. It weathered the storm. It held fast. The way Luke puts it, he says when that storm came and that thing beats on it, it's not going to shake. It's not going to move. It's going to be firm. And that's something we can all identify with. Our holding firm, not even moving. Because, we talked about it a little bit earlier. We've talked about some of the other questions that Jesus asked. The storms are coming. I think when we had that lesson, we talked about storms, and every one of us in this room, we're either in a storm, we're getting ready to be in a storm, or we're coming out of a storm. That's just the way life is. There are challenges that come our way. And they come sometimes unnoticed. Sometimes they come quickly. Could be a call in the middle of the night about a loved one. We're all in storms. When we look at this parable, that's what Jesus is telling us. The wise builder, the foolish builder, they both had storms coming their way. Are we going to be prepared to weather that storm? The second thing I notice about this is we're all builders. Whether we know it, admit to it, recognize it, we're all building. We're building this life that we have here, and we've got a focus, if you will. We're building our life. And we choose what we want to build it on, but we're building it. If our main goal and our main priority is our job, and that takes every ounce of our being, we're building on a shaky foundation if that's where we put our trust and our hope. If it's our family, whether it's the lifestyle that we want to live or whatever it is, all of those things we're building. And we're obeying whatever that is. If we're building on our job, we're obeying our job every step of the way. And I'm not advocating that we shouldn't have jobs and we shouldn't be good employees and we shouldn't work. I'm advocating on what are we building on. We can all have jobs. We can all have responsibilities. But what's our focus? Where are we building? Jesus tells us if we're just using lip service as a Christian, we're building on shaky ground. We're not building on a solid foundation. We think about this and we hear Christ ask and says we need to obey his words. We need to obey his teaching. So I found these two drawings. I think they're some type of engineering drawings or something, but they're talking about the hard way and the easy way. And typically when we think about the commands that God gave us, the things that we should do, the things we shouldn't do, and we think, man, that's hard. And it is. But the way we should look at those is like our gentle Father looking down from heaven and saying, I'm going to show you a better way. I know you want to do this, but that's going to be really hard on you. I'm going to make it easy. If you do it my way, it will be easier. And so Jesus, with his teachings and his instruction, is really he's giving us the blueprint to make the hard way the easy way. And this is not terribly relevant how this thing goes. It's more of the statement of if we listen to Christ and we take his words and we take God's words, when he tells us don't do something, he's really saying don't hurt yourself. Don't do that. It's not good for you. He's there to help us. When he tells us to do something, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's having hard conversations. Sometimes it's doing things that are hard for us to do. He's saying, do them, and I'll help you. I'll help you do those things. If we just listen and let him, Jesus helps make the hard way the easy way. So I want to think just for a minute this morning as we finish up our time together. As Jesus asks the question, he says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things I say to do? That's a pretty broad statement. That's a pretty large statement to say, do the things that he said to do. We've talked about, in these questions that we've gone through, we've talked about the storms and how to handle those storms. in God's Word and how He's taught us how to do that. We talked about our faith. We talked about commitment and willingness to be helped. We talked about where our heart is, what we're seeking. We've talked about doubt. You know, the one thing, and through all these things that we haven't talked about, is love. And that's really the cornerstone of everything that Christ and God has taught us, or teaches us, or tries to teach us, and we should learn. It's all about love. And I've shied away from that, I'll be honest with you, for several reasons. Love's a hard subject for me. And I think probably it's hard to dissect the biblical love we talk about with the love that we have and the feelings that we have, right? When we think about love, we always think about a feeling, or at least that's what I think about. But you know, the reality is love's not that complicated. Jesus had just taught these guys to love their enemies and gave them the blueprint. Love's really not that complicated. He says, little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. And when we think about love, and we think about it in that aspect, yeah, we have a closeness to the people in this room. We've all got family here, and we have a closeness with those people that we don't have with everybody else in this room. What John's saying here says to not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. Love's not that complicated. We can love, and we'll walk through just a few. I think I've got 5 points here as we wrap up this morning to talk about things we can do to enhance our love for one another. Number one is be present. Be present. I'll go back to my Thunder guys. Through these playoffs, they always had a statement that said, be where your feet are. Don't look behind. Don't look too far ahead. Be where your feet are. Be present. We need to be present with one another. My last quote from my guys. I say my guys. My last quote from the Thunder team. One of the players was on a talk show after, and this talk show host, he said, tell me now that it's over, he said, what's your greatest, what's the word he's looking for, the greatest thing you've given to this team? You know, he had 40-point games, and this was not SGA, it was J-Dub. You had 40-point games, you did this, you did that. Said, tell me what you're most proud of contributing to this team. And his answer really blew me away, and some of you may know it. But his answer was time. Time. I've given this team my time, and they've given me their time. And that's the most precious thing we have. And I thought about that, and I'm like, how profound is that? To show love to one another, the first thing we got to do is be present. Be present with each other. Be where our feet are. Engage. Ask questions. Follow up. Just be present. We think about Jesus and some of the interactions he had with Nicodemus that came to him at night. Jesus was present. The woman at the well, his interaction with her, all the things going on, he was present with her. And then finally, Zacchaeus. Just 3 examples of where Christ showed his love to people that maybe weren't very lovely by just being present. And we can all do that. That's not a Herculean task, to be present. The next thing is to serve humbly. In John chapter 13, verse 12 through 15 says, when he had washed their feet, this is Jesus washing the feet, he said, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garment and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. We've got to be humble servants. And I think in this congregation and in this group, there's examples of that all over the place. I remember back several years ago, Mike, we were in Marty's garage, and you did that with kids. And that stuck with me. Just being a humble servant. Again, Matthew chapter 23 and verse 11, Jesus says there, the greatest among you shall be your servant. We've got to serve humbly. All the behind the scenes that go on inside this congregation, those are people serving humbly, not looking for the limelight. Another thing we can do to increase our love is to extend grace. Because we're going to have problems, and we're going to mess up. I'm going to commit to doing something and then fail to follow through. And we need to extend grace to one another in those instances. Matthew chapter 6, verse 14, it says, for if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. We need to choose grace over resentment, reconciliation over division. And when we do that, we're putting the words of Christ into action. We're staying away from that being the one that says, Lord, Lord, and doesn't do his words. These are the types of things that we can do when it comes to love. We need to bear each other's burdens. I saw a shirt just yesterday, or sometime this past week. I think maybe it was Thursday. And on the front of this shirt, it said, be kind. And I was like, okay, that's kind of neat. And on the back of it, it said, everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. And I guess that's a good sentiment. I would say for us as Christians, and if we have the love that we should have for each other, we need to know the battles that everyone's fighting. And we do that by being present, serving humbly, extending grace. But my point is, for us to love, we need to bear our burdens. We need to feel the things that our brothers and sisters are going through with them and be there to help them. And we can only do that if we know. And we can only know if we spend time with people and engage with people. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2, it says, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Again, love is not a complicated thing. Love's not a feeling, an emotion. Love is a connection, if you will, that we have with one another. And then lastly is to maintain unity among diversity. There are 100 people, 150 people here this morning, and not one of us are alike. We all have different characteristic traits, we'll call them, not quirks, but characteristic traits that we have. And all those together make us who we are. In John chapter 17, it says, I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. A lot of words there. But Christ's prayer here is that we are unified. And we're unified for a purpose. And he states it up there at the very end. That purpose is so that the world may know that God sent Christ. Our love for each other would help us maintain that unity. We've got to resist the urge and the common human nature to fracture when things come our way. But for us to love, we can maintain that unity. The question Jesus asks, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not what I say? It's a question that he puts before us each and every one today, this morning. And when we talk about his words, and we talk about love, and we talk about being present and serving humbly and extending grace, bearing each other's burdens, maintaining the unity. You know, the good news is Christ not only commanded us to love, but he gave us the ability to love. He enables us to love through his Spirit dwelling within us. When we think about that, we can love in ways that would be impossible through our own strength, through our own doing. When we find it difficult to love others, we can turn to God for the grace and the wisdom of how to conquer that and get through that and to love others. I want to end with this picture again as we bring this to a close. You can kind of see maybe just behind that house, the one that we talked about that was built far above code to withstand this storm that came. You can kind of see just over the roof. I'm probably going, yep, I did it. One of these is a pointer. Anyway, you can kind of see just over the roof there. It looks like there's a second house behind it. And I couldn't find anything, I couldn't confirm this, but it sure looks to me like that first house saved that second house. And I'd put forth to you today, if we do what God says, and we put into action his words and not just have lip service, there's a good possibility we may help someone. We may help them in their faith, in their walk. We may be able to help them withstand a storm that's coming their way if we just enact on the things that we talked about today about love. We can be that house that helps others. I'll leave that with you this morning. As you go throughout your week this week, we hope this has helped, and maybe we can look to find simple things that we can do for one another, for those that we work with, everybody that we come into contact with, that will help portray and be the type of love that God would have us to be. We don't know the hearts of those this morning here. There may be some in the audience that know God's plan of salvation and want to obey that plan of salvation this morning. And there's not a better time to do that. And we'll have the call here in a minute. If there's one in the audience this morning that needs the prayers of the church for whatever reason, whatever may be going on in your life, whatever storm you may be experiencing, the congregation here is ready, willing, and able to help you and assist you and pray with you in that need. So if there be one in either of these audiences or either of these cases, if you would, you can come and make your wishes known while we stand and sing the song that's been selected.